For nearly 50 years, the FBI tracked one man, not a fugitive, not a foreign spy, Frank Sinatra. They compiled 1,300 pages of wiretaps, surveillance, and financial records, enough to bury almost anyone. Not a single charge was ever filed. The world saw America's greatest entertainer. But behind the music, Sinatra lived a second life, one bound to the most powerful figures in organized crime. And it did not begin in Vegas or Hollywood. It began on the streets of Hoboken, inside his own family. Hoboken, in the 1920s, was a city humming with secrets. On the surface, it was a working-class port town, crowded with dock workers, immigrants, and families making their way in the New World. But as Prohibition took hold in 1920, the rules of daily life changed almost overnight. The law said no alcohol, yet the city's streets, alleys, and waterfronts told a different story. By sundown, men slipped through side doors and down unmarked staircases, carrying crates that clinked with bottles. Bootlegging was not just a sideline here, it was the backbone of the local economy. City directories from the era list dozens of cigar shops and soda parlors that served as fronts for hidden bars. The real business took place in back rooms and behind drawn curtains, where a glass of whiskey cost double the legal wage for a day's work. The Hudson River, with its endless flow of barges and ferries, became a lifeline for smuggling. Small boats ran liquor from Manhattan and even from Canada, dodging patrols with the help of lookouts posted on rooftops. In some neighborhoods, the sound of a police whistle was just another part of the night, as officers either looked the other way or collected their share. Cash flowed quickly, often in small bills, passing from hand to hand in a city that now ran on the profits of forbidden drink. By the end of the 1920s, estimates put bootlegging as the dominant source of income for Hoboken's Italian-American enclaves. Local families who had once scraped by on factory work suddenly found themselves with radios, new suits, and the occasional automobile parked out front. Children grew up surrounded by the rhythms of this underground world. They watched as neighbors disappeared for weeks on business trips to Chicago or Atlantic City, returning with stories they never shared. Street corners became meeting spots for runners waiting for a signal to move the next shipment, while mothers kept a careful eye on which men came and went from the neighborhood bars. For young Frank Sinatra, these streets were both home and classroom. The lines between law and survival blurred in a place where everyone knew someone who ran liquor, and where the difference between a barber and a bootlegger might just be the time of day. The temptation to cut corners, to hustle, to find an edge, these lessons were taught not in schoolrooms, but in the crowded kitchens and smoky back rooms of Hoboken. As the years went on, the city's reputation for hard work and hard living only deepened. The dry years created a generation that understood both the risks and rewards of operating in the shadows. By the time Prohibition ended in 1933, the habits of secrecy, loyalty, and quiet ambition had already taken root. For some, it was just the cost of getting by. For others, it was the beginning of something much bigger. Antonino Martino Sinatra, known as Manny or Marty, lives mostly in the shadows of Hoboken's public record. He was born May 4th, 1892, and died in 1969, according to genealogy sites and a Find a Grave memorial. But when it comes to the claim that Frank Sinatra's father was a bootlegger, the evidence thins out fast. City directories from the era list Manny under several name variants, but none place him behind bars or in a courtroom. No police blotter, no court docket, and no contemporary newspaper ever links Manny directly to bootlegging or running a speakeasy. Instead, the legend grows in the cracks between official documents. A Facebook post in a mob history group repeats the story that the Sinatras ran a local speakeasy during Prohibition, but the post offers no supporting records, Only a family anecdote echoed across social media. An Instagram caption from the Hoboken Historical Museum refers to Martin Sinatra as a proprietor of a Prohibition-era bar, hinting at possible involvement, but it stops short of calling him a bootlegger. Even the official New Jersey legislative record that honors Frank Sinatra skips any mention of his father's business dealings during those years. Researchers looking for hard proof have combed municipal court ledgers, property deeds, and tax rolls. The address at 415 Monmouth Street, where the Sinatra family lived, appears in census records and city directories, but there is no sign of a commercial license or a liquor violation tied to the name. Early census entries list Manny as a laborer, sometimes a fireman, sometimes a bartender, but never as a man charged with breaking the law. The gap in documentation is striking, especially for a city like Hoboken, where records of prohibition raids and arrests are otherwise well preserved. Some researchers suggest that the absence of evidence could mean Manny simply kept a low enough profile to avoid trouble, or that he was never deeply involved in the trade at all. Others argue that the myth of Manny the bootlegger grew larger as Frank's fame exploded, fueled by a public eager to connect the star to a romanticized underworld past. What is certain is that Frank Sinatra's childhood was shaped by a neighborhood where illegal liquor was part of daily life, whether or not his father ran a still or a speakeasy. The lines between honest work and hustling blurred for many families, and Manny's name, shifting in spelling and nickname from document to document, remains a kind of silhouette in the archives. The records confirm his presence, his family, and his dates, but when it comes to the claim that he was a bootlegger, the paper trail fades into rumor. This uncertainty lingers, not just as a research problem, but as a kind of ghost in the Sinatra story. The missing evidence invites speculation, and that speculation becomes part of the legend. As Frank Sinatra moved from Hoboken's crowded kitchens to the national stage, the question of his father's true role in the Prohibition underworld remains unanswered, a gap that both frustrates historians and keeps the myth alive. The next chapter in Sinatra's life would bring him into contact with men whose criminal ties were anything but ambiguous, pushing the story from the fog of family rumor into the harsh light of FBI surveillance and mob alliances. In February 1960, the Riviera Hotel in Palm Springs became the unlikely center of American power and underworld intrigue. Frank Sinatra, at the peak of his fame, opened his private circle to Sam Giancana, the Chicago outfit boss, whose reach extended from the back rooms of Cicero to the glittering lights of Las Vegas. Hotel guest logs from that weekend confirm both names on the registry, along with a handful of Rat Pack regulars and a scattering of Hollywood executives. FBI surveillance notes from the San Diego field office record a flurry of activity around Sinatra's estate from February 2nd to the 5th, citing the arrival of known Chicago representatives. The days unfolded in a haze of sun, cocktails, and whispered conversations. Poolside, Sinatra and Giancana traded stories and inside jokes, their easy camaraderie drawing glances from staff and guests alike. Gossip columns later described the scene as a sun-soaked conclave, but the real business happened away from the cameras. Private dinners stretched late into the night, with Sinatra's suite serving as both sanctuary and negotiation table. Hotel staff noted the unusual number of closed-door meetings and the steady flow of high-profile visitors, some arriving under assumed names, others ushered in quietly by trusted aides. Wiretaps did not catch every word, but FBI logs hint at discussions that ranged far beyond music or movies. Las Vegas casino projects, the shifting sands of Nevada gaming licenses, and the upcoming presidential election all surfaced in coded fragments. Giancana, comfortable in Sinatra's world of Hollywood glamour, found in his host a partner who could bridge the gap between the mob's muscle and the establishment's influence. For Sinatra, Giancana offered more than protection. He brought access, favors, and a kind of street credibility that no amount of gold records could buy. The weekend's guest list, preserved in hotel archives, reads like a roll call of ambition and risk. Every handshake, every private aside, deepened the bond between entertainer and mob boss. Their alliance was no longer rumor. It was documented, observed, and, for those watching closely, unmistakably intimate. The boundaries between friendship and business, between favor and obligation, blurred in the desert sun. What began as a gathering of friends ended as a pact with consequences that would ripple through politics, law enforcement, and the American imagination for decades to come. Illinois, in 1960, became the battleground where politics, celebrity, and organized crime collided. John F. Kennedy's campaign, desperate for every vote, eyed Chicago as both prize and minefield. In Cook County, the Democratic machine's reach was legendary, but that year the margins were razor thin. Kennedy would ultimately win Illinois by less than 9,000 votes, a difference of just 0.1%. Behind the scenes, rumors swirled about unusual surges in campaign donations. State filings from the weeks before the election show a sudden spike in independent expenditures, many traced to shell companies with no clear business activity. Political scientists who later combed these records found no direct evidence linking these funds to Sam Giancana or the outfit. But the timing and anonymity of the donations fueled suspicion. While the paper trail faded, the human chain was harder to deny. Peter Lawford, actor and Kennedy's brother-in-law, became the messenger no one envied. He moved easily between Hollywood parties and political backrooms, but his real value was as a bridge, carrying requests, relaying reassurances, and, according to some informants, delivering envelopes whose contents were never itemized. Lawford's own memoir would later admit, "I never imagined the parties we threw would become political bargaining chips." As the campaign intensified, Lawford's role grew more complicated. He was present at private gatherings where Sinatra's name lent legitimacy to voter drives on Chicago's South Side, and where the promise of turnout was quietly bartered for access and favor. FBI informant reports from 1964 describe Lawford as the go-between for Giancana's money and Kennedy's campaign operatives, though other historians argue there is no hard proof he ever handled cash. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the shadows between testimony and silence. After the election, the alliance that had seemed so useful began to unravel. Robert F. Kennedy, now Attorney General, turned his attention to organized crime. His crusade put him on a collision course with the very figures who had, according to legend, helped put his brother in the White House. The White House canceled a planned visit to Sinatra's Palm Springs estate, sending Lawford to deliver the news in person. The break was public and humiliating. Sinatra's anger was matched only by his sense of betrayal. What began as a social alliance had become an institutional conflict. The same connections that once delivered votes now brought scrutiny. Regulators set their sights on Las Vegas and the casinos, where Sinatra's name still drew crowds. The fallout from Illinois would ripple through every corner of Sinatra's world, turning old friendships into liabilities and setting the stage for the next battle. This time over money, licenses, and the future of the mob's last great empire. On July 30th, 1963, the Nevada Gaming Commission convened in Carson City, facing a decision that would reverberate through the worlds of entertainment and organized crime. The Cal Neva Lodge, perched on the state line between California and Nevada, had long been a symbol of Sinatra's reach. a playground for celebrities, politicians, and men whose names never appeared on the guest list. Sinatra was more than a headliner here. He held a controlling interest, sharing ownership with Dean Martin and Jack Intrater. But the real concern for regulators was the shadow cast by Sam Giancana. Commissioners pored over minutes detailing irregularities in the lodge's cash flow. Shell companies, some registered to fictitious addresses, had received consulting fees and performance bonuses that exceeded 6 figures. Auditors flagged payouts that left the casino's books looking clean, while the real money traveled elsewhere. The pattern was clear. After a string of high-profile weekends, large sums moved out the door, routed through holding companies with ties to Chicago. Testimony that day included references to a confidential FBI memorandum, which linked Giancana directly to the Calneva's financial operations. The commission's chair, leaning into his microphone, read the core finding: evidence of illegal ownership interests and ongoing association with known organized crime figures. The vote was not unanimous. 5 commissioners voted to revoke the Calneva's gaming license. 2 abstained, citing insufficient evidence for criminal prosecution. But the result was decisive. Sinatra's casino was finished as a legitimate gambling operation. The decision hit Sinatra hard. Overnight, the Calneva's value collapsed. Casino revenue, once buoyed by sold-out shows and high roller tables, dried up. Employees lost jobs. Sinatra's own stake, estimated at over $1 million, became a legal liability. Attempts to intervene through political contacts failed. A Senate subcommittee later reviewed the commission's findings, noting that Sinatra's withdrawal from the lodge coincided exactly with the state's action. The commission's minutes, now archived in the Nevada State Library, record the moment when entertainment, money, and the mob collided under the harsh light of state scrutiny. The Calneva episode did not just cost Sinatra a fortune. It exposed the machinery that allowed organized crime to operate behind a curtain of celebrity, and gave federal investigators new cause to widen their surveillance. The FBI file on Frank Sinatra spanned more than 1,300 pages by the time it was partially released under the Freedom of Information Act in 1998. Decades of surveillance, wiretaps, informant interviews, and internal analysis fill the dossier, yet not a single criminal charge was ever filed against him. The file itself is split into hundreds of pages of daily surveillance logs. Agents tracked Sinatra's meetings, phone calls, and movements from hotel suites in Las Vegas to private dinners in Chicago. Informant statements fill another section, some claiming to witness cash gifts exchanged between Sinatra and known mob figures, others detailing late-night phone calls with Sam Giancana or casino bosses. A 1962 memo from Special Agent James R. Cox notes that Sinatra's visits to Giancana's Chicago residence lined up with sudden cash deposits at the Sands Casino. Still, the memo ends with a request for further tracing, not an accusation. Another excerpt from 1970 summarizes the entire investigation. Despite extensive surveillance, no prosecutable evidence of bribery or illicit financial transactions has been secured. However, the pattern of associations remains concerning. The Department of Justice reviewed the FBI findings more than once. In 1976, a formal memo declined prosecution, citing a lack of corroborated witness testimony and no direct financial records linking Sinatra to crimes. The memo, never released in full, reportedly concluded that the evidence did not meet the standard for probable cause or the burden required for criminal trial. Informant reports, while colorful, often contradicted each other or failed to match the facts on the ground. Phone taps picked up Sinatra's voice, but never a clear admission of wrongdoing. Even with the sheer volume of material, wiretaps, cash movement logs, and casino audits, Federal investigators could not close the gap between suspicion and proof. The file, thick with rumor and observation, stands as both a monument to federal suspicion and a record of unanswered questions. Sinatra's name runs through page after page, always at the center of the action, yet always just out of reach of the law. Today, celebrity and power still blur the lines between influence and accountability. The 1,300-page FBI file on Sinatra remains public record, yet so do the unanswered questions. When fame shields those closest to the shadows, truth becomes a moving target. In a world hungry for transparency, the cost of silence is never just history, it is ongoing reality. What do you think? Share your thoughts below.